Welcome. Thanks for coming out, everyone. My name is Scott Endel, and I'm the Director of Parks, Recreation, and Forestry here for the City of Fitchburg. So on behalf of the Park Commission and our staff, we'd like to welcome all of you. I did want to introduce, I see some Park Commission members and some alders that are here tonight, so I certainly want to recognize them before we get started. We have Sue Easterday. She's the Park Commission Chair. We have Chris Sinna. He's a Park Commission Chair. Patrick Cheney is a Park Commission. Randy Udall is a Udell. Thank you for correcting me. Is an alder, and then Julia Arata Frada. I saw her, but I don't know where she went. She's actually an alder who is on the Park Commission. A little bit of a lead-in into today's presentation. The park system is broken up into three different park classifications. We have community parks, which are basically, as they're described or as they're defined, is for the whole community. We have area parks, which are designated for a specific area. And then we also have neighborhood parks, which are designated for the neighborhood. And depending on the park classification, that will determine what kind of amenities are included in each of those classifications. Now, the City of Fitchburg, we have about 70 or 75 parks in total. 4 of them are currently community parks, which is McGaw Park. And typically, the community park will have a specific feature that is only one within the community, so everybody is able to go there. So McGaw Park is really our athletic kind of facility. We have softball fields there, pickleball courts, those kinds of things. That's one of our community parks. McKee Farms Park is a community park, and we have a lot of community events at McKee Farms Park, which is larger, and we also have the tennis courts at McKee Farms Park. We also have Sunnyside Park, which is our dog park. So the community park, we only have one within the community, so that's our community dog park. And then we also have the Nine Springs Golf Course. So we only have one golf course within the community, and that's classified as a community park. And the community parks are really special and unique. Neighborhood parks all have playgrounds and those kinds of things. The park that we're going to talk about today is Terravessa, or it's actually an agricultural park, which is also going to be classified as a community park because it's the only one that we'll have within the city of Fitchburg. I will tell you that a couple years back, maybe 3, we began to allow community garden plots within 4 of our parks. They're 10 by 10 or 10 by 20 plots, and we have about 80 plus community garden plots within those four parks. So it really tells us that there is an interest and a need for that within the community. I did include just one more quick comment before I pass it over to Rob. The Terravessa Park Master Plan. This was the original plan that was identified when the plat came into the community. And what we did, or what the Park Commission did, is we decided where the parks were going to be within that specific development. And we kind of view Terravessa as a small community, if you would. So we're really looking to try to have each of the different types of parks within the community. So we have a smaller neighborhood park down on the bottom, towards the south by Goodland Road. There's actually going to be a sliver along Larson Road up there. We actually have a natural area adjacent to the west of the school. And then the area that we're speaking about specifically is down in the southeast corner, which is our future agricultural park, which is going to be a unique feature. So I think with that, hopefully that gave you a little bit of an overview on the park system, where we're at, and what this presentation is really going to be about tonight. So with that, I'll kick it off to Rob Stein from EOR, and let him go from there.
Thank you, Scott, and thanks for your patience, and thanks for coming out. I know the days are getting longer, and there's more light, and it's harder to get people into these meetings, so I appreciate your time to come out and invest in this park space. Okay, just quick introduction. As Scott said, I'm Rob Stein with EOR. I'm a landscape architect. And working in partnership with Sheena, New, and Nicholas, and you can thank them for the treats and refreshments in the back. They're with Rooted here in Madison, which is an organization that promotes plans for and really supports urban agricultural and food systems within a kind of an urban setting. So they're really valuable partners in understanding how these sorts of parks and urban agricultural function, kind of from the nuts and bolts angle of things. A little bit of background. I know Scott gave a good introduction as to what we're talking about here. But Terravessa Ag Park was land dedication that was given into parkland dedication that came out of the development of the Terravessa neighborhood. And it's located in the southeast portion of the site. And this site was used as kind of a large borrow area for that development. On the slide here, you can kind of just see the progression, and I apologize for those in the room here. It's a little bit muddy, but you can kind of see the historic large plot farms that were there originally, and then the development started, and now it's kind of at a stabilized point where it has been it's been planted, and some of those restored native areas have already been seeded and taken into place. And you can see that from this aerial here, and I'll try to outline it. Much of the borrow area was this kind of portion of the site. And some of the more undisturbed areas would be kind of defined by that space on the more edges of the site. And that plays into how we planned the design as we went forward with this. Right. So this is up by the school, kind of, and looking south on the site. This was taken last summer, but just to give a little bit of context of kind of the natural beauty of the site, and the intent of this park is not only chief among them is to provide produce and growing opportunities for the community, but it also has the opportunity to fit into a neighborhood and a community to offer multiple benefits. So we try to maximize what this park could be as kind of added benefits outside of agricultural production. So where we are now is we met late in 2022, and we had kind of a kickoff meeting where we kind of introduced the site and talked a little bit more about what an agricultural park could be. And depending on the site and the community and the needs, it can be a lot of things. But we got a lot of feedback at that meeting, and there was a lot of support, which was nice to see from the community. And then we took that information and started to develop concepts of what the site could be physically laid out to look like. A couple of things when we went into this process, we looked at what this process is in the concept development stage right now. It's a study of design alternatives, which you can see up here on the boards, and we'll get more in depth to in a few slides. But it's also an evolution of the concept components. So all those different things we talked about in that first meeting of, could it be a gathering space? Could it be obviously growing spaces? Could there be an educational component, recreation, wellness? How we can move those parts around to kind of actually create the physical space. This is also an opportunity to express concerns and positive things about the process, or what you're seeing, or what you want to see, or what you're not seeing, as well as it's an opportunity to mix and match. We have two concepts. It's not black and white, one or the other. We fully intend that something might resonate from one and not the other. And now is kind of your opportunity to express those concerns and what you like. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and have an opportunity to comment. And outside of this meeting and those online, we'll have an opportunity as well. What this is not a final design. So the things you see before you are not the final design. We're marching towards that goal. And what the final master plan will be a roadmap I always say that in these meetings. It's going to be a roadmap. I should update it. It's going to be your navigation system in your car or your Google Maps. But it really kind of just gives you a map of where to start and to get these things implemented into the community. It doesn't specify specific equipment. In some of the imagery, you'll see play equipment or a shelter or a water source. Those aren't specifically specified at this point. That comes later down the line when you go into the implementation stage, when you start actually getting down to the nuts and bolts of, what are the road surfacing, what sort of parking opportunities are going to be there. And like I said, it's not a strict choice between one or the other. Some of the parameters of design, like I said, we focus within the property lines of this lot. But looking at the connectivity and how it integrates within the park system was also taken into account, and how we can kind of maximize those connections and be part of that system. It's not a standalone thing. It's part of a park system. So we look at the opportunities with that. It's anticipated that this will be a phased project. Depending on funds and demands, those are the sorts of things that will kind of dictate, how aggressive the implementation of a park like this would be put into place. We'll look at added benefits outside of produce and food production, and then sustainability. And that's not just from, stormwater and advanced ecosystems, but also from like a city functioning standpoint, maintenance and the dollars and cents it costs to run a park like this. So. Okay, so based on that information, a couple of concepts were designed. Concept one here is, you'll see there's a large area of the site is obviously dedicated for plotted produce production and agriculture. That's the main goal of this park. The fact of the matter is that you see a lot of different sizes of plots, but generally speaking, the access to the site is in the south central portion of the site. When the development of this, or the restoration of this plot was completed during the development of the neighborhood, that was specifically graded and designed so that there was an access off of that southern road there. And it really makes, it's the only sensible place to access this site, at least with a vehicle. On the eastern portion of the site, we looked at that, but there's a hill over there, and there's some sightline issues, and this kind of controls access. And with a park like this, it's kind of nice to have one entrance and exit, at least from a vehicular standpoint, for safety and security and maintenance reasons. So you'll see some similarities amongst these concepts, but I'll point out some of the differences as well. So, as noted earlier in the site, in the presentation here, and I'll get my squiggly line tool out here, the area that was kind of the more undisturbed portion of the site, which is this portion here, and then a good portion of this over here. That is, coincidentally, there's on the southeast portion of the site is the steepest area of the site, and it's undisturbed. And it seemed to make a lot of sense, and it was supported that, that there was no reason to till up kind of that best restored natural prairie area. And that was seeded with native species. It's not just a cover crop of annual rye and things. There's a lot of benefit in those systems. So in both concepts, you'll see that that's generally not overly disturbed, although I think there is opportunity for some more unique agricultural production. In this, you can see you could have, vineyards and vine and grape production in that, which is kind of an aesthetic agricultural approach, and it's a little bit less invasive, or it can be, depending on how aggressive you want to get with that. And then just moving kind of east to west here, working within that buffer of kind of that native restored area, there'd be opportunities for tree screening, and it was foreseen that these trees would be native, certainly, but also looking for opportunities to have nutting trees that could have benefits for some gathering and foraging kind of opportunities. So it's not a strict programmed sort of agriculture, but kind of that foraging approach. And that's a recurring theme in both of these concepts throughout. As mentioned, down here is kind of the hub of the site. This is the access of the site. It's kind of a real important part of the site in both concepts, and we'll take a little bit closer look at that as areas. But that's where you're going to enter the site, be able to park, and then enter into the larger scale agricultural areas from that area. But some of the things that you'll see in that site is parking opportunities, gathering space opportunities, educational, accessible plots. You can have some more raised beds that, people with back issues or mobility problems could either, roll up in a wheelchair or any sort of mobility issues that are going to be easier to access. And they'll be close to parking, and it just makes sense to keep those things next to those facilities. Some of the other things you'll see is hoop houses or greenhouses, whether they're more permanent structures or more temporary seasonal is kind of not yet determined. And that's something that might come in a future phase. But as you can see, working with the grades of the site, you have kind of main circulation going around the site and cutting through the site. Because one thing you need as growers is you need to be able to access the plots that you're working from all sides. So there'd be kind of that primary access trail, and then going in between plots, you'd have opportunities as well. Maybe not with a full-size vehicle, but in certain areas maybe you would, and it'd just be like grass between plots, and then you'd have access to those. And like I mentioned before, the sizes and the specific layout of those plots is a little unknown depending on demand and things like that. But you have the opportunity to create kind of a mosaic and patchwork of agricultural production, which is, if you've ever flown in a plane, you see that on a large scale. Well, this site on the bottom here happens to be kind of the high point, and you actually are elevated. And has anybody been out there to that park spot and pulled in there? It's kind of a nice, it's subtle, but you do get an overview of the entire park from that site. And there are some viewshed considerations which kind of create that placemaking opportunity or a backdrop. One of the major connections is going to be with the Terravessa neighborhood itself. It's right there. It's in their backyard, and it's frankly going to be a great asset to those neighborhoods. And there's already a system of trails to come off of. So people living in those neighborhoods will have the opportunity to come and enjoy this space. And I understand that if you live in that neighborhood, that's a long way to carry your wheelbarrow and your hoe and your rake and everything. That might not be overly realistic for gardening those plots in this concept, but what you'll see in both concepts is there's a dotted line going, kind of circumnavigating all the way around the park, and that's one of those added benefits. Looking at some of the community surveys that I've seen for the community and other communities, frankly, is that increasing the amount of walking trails and recreational trails is not a contentious item. It's something that everybody gets on board with pretty much. So the opportunity to kind of extend those trail systems, you can do, it's like, I think it's almost a mile all the way around there. So that can be part of an exercise routine for people that may not be interested in agriculture or just taking advantage of the neighborhood amenities. But as kind of a secondary entrance to the site in this concept, we have kind of that urban orchard, is having fruiting trees. They're not only ornamental, but they screen. They do provide kind of that foraging produce. You can have nutting trees, and then as those mature, you kind of get this oasis savanna on a micro scale. I understand we're not talking about an acre of land here, but it's symbolic, and it does create kind of a real naturalized entrance into the park from that Terravessa side. Throughout the park, there are a couple of different facilities and a varying scale, and where exactly those end up would depend on phasing and need would drive those. But having those satellite equipment shelters or lockable sheds or bins, whatever that is, because frankly, a lot of people aren't going to have or might not have the ability to bring in a bunch of equipment or haul out a bunch of stuff every time that they come out there. So having some of those satellite places to put your equipment to kind of aid and frankly support the success of the park, because if you add those amenities, it's going to make it more attractive for people that are interested in that, so it makes it easier for them to use. So pretty low investment, but big return. Okay. With that, I'm going to zoom in here. So this is that hub area. So this is our kind of entrance off the main road there. In this concept, you'll see we'll have a dedicated parking lot and also a drop-off, maybe a bus parking area over on the right-hand side. I'll do my best to kind of scribble on this as we go. And then that kind of have this roundabout circulation that services this kind of main gathering shelter space. Again, what that is a little bit unknown, but that has the potential to be, restrooms. It could have restroom screenings for more portable restroom functions. Certainly covered to host picnicking or other sort of community-sponsored events, educational opportunities. Talking about those views that go this way, going off there, we have an informal kind of naturalized seating area backdrop by fruiting trees and nutting trees, which really kind of sets a beautiful scene. And I have some imagery further on in the presentation that will help you kind of get a better understanding of the scale of this site. It's kind of hard looking at a plan like this to really kind of gauge, what does that look like? How much room do we really have out there? So that's forthcoming. That's a teaser, so you can't leave the meeting early. And this is kind of that phase one opportunity for agricultural in this space. It's the low-hanging fruit, pun intended. You can have accessible plots, 10 by 20 in-ground plots that are easy to get to, and it's just kind of a continuation of some of the community gardens that you have in other park spaces. It would be a similar function to that. And then, a space for hoop houses and a play space. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that could be, but it's seen as kind of this hub of activity. So this is an agricultural park. We're certainly going to have that component. It would be silly not to have some sort of educational component surrounding the kind of the goals of this park. And then having play spaces is always an added benefit to kind of support this space and support the neighborhood, but also the whole community, because this is a community park. If that families are coming here to do their work on their plots, having a play space for kids to get dirty and have some fun too is another thing that we looked at. And that brings us to concept 2. Again, the core of this site is dedicated to agricultural production. But it's laid out in a slightly different way. And one of the main differences between this concept is that it leaves more space open for kind of that restored prairie. And it does a couple of things. It always allows for the opportunity for expansion. It's not like you couldn't take that space if the need is so great that you need that space. But in the meantime, it kind of inwardly focuses the site And it kind of creates this kind of cloistered effect on a large scale of having this kind of defined space within this kind of preserved, naturalized area. And it provides the screening. That was one thing we heard in our first meeting is, some people, not opposed to it, but if there's going to be things that are going to be not necessarily attractive or what they perceive as attractive, this really kind of creates an envelope around the whole site and gives it that foreground of, it's not necessarily a whole screen, but it's kind of that implied screen by having that buffer of native grasses and forbs. Having that perimeter trail persists in this one. With the expanded areas, you do have some opportunities to kind of expand upon that trail system. Looking at this site over here where we had the grapevines and the other concept, a different approach would be to dedicate that as kind of an educational hub or a peekaboo trail that could have kind of an outdoor classroom area, a naturalized gathering space that's outfitted with, fruiting trees and kind of those foraging shrubs and lower things that would engage children and kind of drive those creative endeavors that they might occupy their time with while mom and dad are working more deliberately on produce. Let me see here. One thing to note in this is it takes a different approach into that neighborhood connection, that secondary connection. It's a more formalized secondary entrance into the park. And what this one offers, the opportunity versus the other one, is to have more of those small-scale plots, those 10 by 10, 10 by 20 in-ground plots that, if you have a place for equipment, then people in that neighborhood might be motivated to, walk and do their gardening there and actually, create a pretty neat gardening space, and that becomes kind of the entrance into the park. This middle band going through here is the kind of the low spot. It's a pretty gradual low spot, so only in extreme events would that hold much water for very long at all. The site is graded to go from the west to the east, but focusing native restoration with more wetland species and emergent species. You have the opportunity to do that there, and then also kind of a different palette of edible shrubs and plants like that as well, that it's more naturalized and it supports activities like that. Okay. Zooming in, we have kind of a different layout here. It's a little more angular, north to south. Dedicated parking, more of a soft surface trail, where folks can pull off to the side. It's maybe a little bit informal in the parking, but then having that gathering space. Can you see my cursor? Yeah. Having this gathering space in here, and then working off a real spine that continues all the way to the northern border of the property, and that's where you get kind of that view shed, and you could have kind of a grand staircase going down. And granted, it's not that steep for those who've been down there, but it is kind of the most dramatic elevation change you have on site. So taking advantage of that opportunity for berry patches, certainly accessible garden plots, tree groves, hoop houses, a naturalized play area, similar items laid out in a kind of a different fashion. You see off to the left here, this would be an obvious choice for expansion of some kind of early stage plots as well. It just makes sense to keep things closest to that hub and the access, and then kind of radiate out there, out from there. Okay. So that was quick. Anybody want to have any comments for me at the right now or questions? And I'll explain what we're looking at here if not.
How much parking do we typically have in other neighborhood parks?
Neighborhood parks or community parks? Yeah, he was just asking how much parking is typical at a community park. I don't know that offhand, Scott.
Well, and it really depends on the types of activities that are there. Certainly at McGaw or McKee, which are athletic facilities and special events, there needs to be a lot of parking. I would say that with this facility, it's really just basically for the customers or the people that are going to visit. So, the parking is really kind of designed or sized for the type of customer, if you would, that would be, or the number of customers that will be visiting.
And it's a good question, and I certainly don't have a firm answer, but what I do know is that, as we said, this would be a phased project, kind of driven by demand. But down here, in the lower left here, is that one comment we got is, having consideration for trailers, and people are going to be hauling out weeds, and they're going to be hauling things in, soil amendments, and things like that. So having a space for overflow parking, trailer parking, there's certainly room to kind of dedicate space for kind of that informal parking. Okay, so as I alluded to before, there's two concepts here. They're similar in a lot of ways, but they have some differences too, certainly. And, this isn't a final plan, so this isn't exactly what's going to be on the final plan, but I wanted to show something to kind of help people understand kind of the scale of what we're talking about here. So basically what you see in this image here is kind of this blown up area. Actually, it's this blown up area. So it would be standing in this lower southwest corner and looking to the northwest. So you can kind of get an idea of how many plots you're looking at there, and see how the space kind of fills out when you're not looking at it from above, and you have some verticality, and once those trees mature. And
if I might, Rob, that area is about an acre in size, just for reference. That plateau or that area at the front is about an acre in size, so that gives you a little bit of reference. Oh, you want?
for those in the room,
It's up to you.
We've got an online question, Rob.
yes.
Are there any anticipated differences on impact of wildlife between the two concepts?
The main difference would be in the concept 2 is there's more dedicated native restoration areas. So they would provide more pollinator habitat and kind of native species diversity. So I'm speaking to online. So that would be the main difference that I can think of off the top of my head. Both kind of maintain that low point where it probably wouldn't be that desirable for agricultural production, and I think you'd have opportunities to introduce kind of those wetland species, and then you might actually start to see more bugs and bunnies that like their feet wet. So,
and certainly, if you look at the Terravessa Park Master Plan going to the north, the area that we're talking about is maybe a third the size of the natural stormwater type of environment to the north. So there certainly is a lot of opportunities further to the north for wildlife and those things.
yeah, that's a good point. As we pointed out early on in the kind of the 2019, I think was when that original master plan was created, you kind of get this emerald necklace of park system and natural areas. So this would certainly be a big gemstone in that necklace. Okay, park looking northeast. Actually, is that right? Yeah. kind of see how, have some context with some vehicles in there, people, how the site kind of comes alive. And this is looking southwest, so kind of back towards the road and the access point there. And again, I don't want people to get too hung up on the play equipment and what this is not. This is not specific equipment. This is more to illustrate a play space, and what that becomes is yet to be determined. Same for the shelter. Is that going to have an enclosed room? Is it going to have maintenance? Is it going to have other facilities and amenities? Right now, we're kind of earmarking it as an open-air shelter gathering space that, in this sense, is kind of the foreground for this big view to the north. And this is the second. Excuse me. This would be kind of takes the patterns of the second concept and looks like it kind of has that more radiating pattern. And I'm a little elevated here, I understand, but again, those that have been out there, you do get a view. It does kind of lay out the land before you. So just to kind of give you and I put the trucks in there and some vans in there, and people would be pulling off to the side. So once on the site, you don't need dedicated parking. People are going to just pull off, and it has to be convenient. Otherwise, it's not going to be usable. As we kind of hone in and develop this final master plan, some of the considerations we'll have to think about is, what do you prefer? Would you want an aggregate path, or do you want mowed paths? Do you want an asphalt parking lot or more gravel? Opportunity for solar versus just on the grid. Excuse me. Nature play versus more traditional. Excuse me. Outhouses versus something more substantial and plumbed. Cistern water harvesting. Excuse me, I feel like I should turn up. Oh, the stuff just chokes me up. Okay. One thing with the kind of before we started the meeting, the discussion of water came up, and that was discussed in the first meeting, and it's worth noting now. Water considerations, there would be water here. And when the Terravessa neighborhood was planned, if you go back here, there's a outlot where my cursor is here that is park space. And water supply was stubbed into that in thinking that this would be the supply for the agricultural park. There is no water coming off of the southern road there. So wells are not an option. We did investigate that, and that's not allowed. But yeah, and if demand became higher, we would have to tap the water main running through that closest street in Terravessa there to upsize that water service. Okay. So those are a few of the considerations. You have an online question? Just pause and see what that is. Yes.
We have a couple questions online. Let me read those. Wondering, has there been any discussion about pet waste garbage cans along the trails? Not sure who would manage that, but something to consider. Many dogs in this neighborhood and poop along the paths already. I imagine we'll see it there too.
Fair comment. I bet you would. And thank you for the person who posed that question. Specifically, no, we have not given consideration that, but we are keeping notes of all this stuff, and that's something that is a real obvious recommendation that we would have. I don't know if that would be shown on the master plan, but it's a small detail, but I'm glad someone mentioned it.
And we would, at McKee, we do have a pet waste station because that's one of our community parks. Well, I certainly would see that this potentially could have the same types of amenities to provide service for that. Sure.
Another thought is there any opportunity for public art somewhere?
I think certainly in the shelter potential. Why'd you take the microphone? I would see, certainly in the shelter potentially, or maybe even, on the pavement or whatever spaces might be available.
If I could add to that a little bit, I don't know if it's a trend, but something I try to do in parks that I've designed is kind of artful integration. So if not a dedicated art piece or a sculpture, because I love public art and I'm always for it. Depending on the setting, having a piece of art is a piece of maintenance that the park and the city has to account for. This might be a great candidate for that, but it is kind of remote. So trying to do artful integration, and what I mean by that is, if there's elements of the park that you can kind of weave a story into, or some sort of artistic element, like a railing, and I don't know what that is, but something reflects maybe something of the history, or like Scott mentioned, in the pavement, something that's really resilient, that you can maybe even drive on, that's representative of, landforms or history or culture. Those are oftentimes things that, if there's not a dedicated spot for specifically art, ways that you can kind of represent art in a more kind of maintenance-friendly way. Is that all for online?
No, we got more.
Okay. I know Sue had her hand up. Do you want to jump in now, or do you want to go? Okay.
All right, a couple questions. With the orchard areas, Rooted may know the answers, and you too, but overcoming the objections to imperfect fruit, because we do have a couple community areas where there are orchards, and a citizen manages one of them who's well-versed in all aspects, and in the fall he can't give the fruit away because it's got spots on it, on the apples. So that may not even be what we're talking about here, but I just wanted to raise it as something to overcome. I think that's a nice concept, but then having it become useful to the community is another hurdle.
Did you want?
Yeah, you talked about people hauling weeds away. Could we not have a place here just for people to leave weeds for compost, that
Yes.
type of thing?
Yes, composting would be.
Yeah,
part of it.
and and even mulch pickup and compost. And so the water line that's currently in the park, is that simply sized to manage like the restroom and water fountain in the park? And if over time there's more demand for water in the ag park, then the whole line would have to be made larger? Is that what?
Likely what would happen is we'd tap a new line on that water main,
A separate, okay,
probably closer to that elbow in that turn of the road.
okay. And then
Up
I'm more familiar with just the small individual community garden plots, but here there are many, many really large areas. Now, who are the intended users of the large areas?
Scott, do you want to handle that, or?
Well, in that's kind of, we've got Rooted, who's the experts in the area that are kind of, in that circle, if you would, and certainly, hopefully they would be able to give us a little insight as far as how many customers we may have for these larger plots.
Yes, I will take a shot at both of your questions. So first, question to imperfect fruits. So actually, a lot of community gardens in the Madison area, they have orchards, lots of fruit trees around their community gardens. And so, not only that, but also the food forest idea, right? And so that's a welcoming thing, right? That's the great thing about having Terravessa community right there, is that becomes a welcoming aspect as well. You know what? You come, you pick, you bring home, right? So that, and then the large plots. I have a waiting list. I have a waiting list, definitely. Maybe not so much with, Fitchburg residents, but definitely, outside of Fitchburg residents, as if if you're welcoming to just any growers in particular, there is no issue in, filling up the big plots at all. I actually had a phone conversation even yesterday night with a resident who lived on the far east side of Madison, and she's like, I want a large plot. And I was like, okay, well, first she's like, I want a gardening space. And so I was like, okay, where do you live? Identified that. And then I was like, let's look at spaces that's closer to you. And she's like, I want a big plot. And I was like, okay, that means it's 45 minutes away from you. Would you be willing to drive there? And she said, yes, I am, as long as I have that space to grow. Anything else you two want to add?
I've never held the microphone. I would also say, there are a lot of subsistence farmers that need that amount of space, and this park will be unique in that there will be water, there will be spaces for kids to play. We already experience a lot of demand for that sort of space, so when you add these other amenities, I'm sure there will be plenty of folks who want to do that sort of growing. And as far as imperfect fruit, it is a constant struggle in everything, especially in farming. And well-maintained trees are going to produce better fruit. So as long as they're being maintained, pruned, and taken care of, they will be producing better fruit. But then you can also do things like, if there's some sort of programming or community events where you're doing apple pressing, or the types of things where you use the imperfect fruit for that kind of specific purpose. So I think the answer is really just to engage community enough that there's enough ownership and attachment to the health of the plants and the trees and the use of the fruit.
There was a question about having a community tool shed. It sounds like there might be one in the Swan Creek Community Garden. Would that be?
Yep. As we touched on, there would be some equipment, facilities, storage, and then, as the park grew, have satellite ones so that they're not all maybe at the access site, but closer to where they'd be used. Yes, sir. Oh, you need the mic.
I've heard you characterize the users of this as customers, which suggests payment to me. Do you plan to price it to recover the cost of development and maintenance?
No.
This seems like a lot of money for a fairly small segment of the Fitchburg city.
I would agree. There's a lot of different types of users within the park system in the city, and certainly it isn't going to be a break-even type of thing. I guess we kind of view it in the Parks Department and the community as an investment in the community. Pardon me?
At least limited to residents of Fitchburg?
We probably wouldn't limit it to the residents of the city of Fitchburg.
Just to answer that, a lot of times, if there's demand from the citizens of Fitchburg, they would probably have some sort of priority over time. But if there isn't, then you can be broader in your thinking. So that's how I've seen it work other places, so maybe that's worth considering.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar. We, in most garden spaces that are community garden spaces, there is sort of priority or first right of refusal to residents or neighbors. And then the other thing, we we work in urban agriculture, so there's an obvious bias there. But I think to the extent that you talk about who is served by it, I think it's far beyond the people who are actually using it for production and growing. what we experience at Troy Farm, at Badger Rock Farm, even at Anderson Farm County Park. These are all collaborative growing spaces and community growing spaces. Is other people want to see it. And the point of urban agriculture and community agriculture isn't necessarily for the producers themselves or the product produced, but for the community to be engaged with their food system and with those around them that are growing food.
Good online? Okay. Thanks for all the questions and comments. It helps to create a dialogue, and it really helps to drive the development of this plan. So I appreciate all the comments online and in person here. So we talked about this, and Scott will touch on this a little bit more, but this is going to be a phase project. This isn't the final master plan, but this is just kind of an illustration to show you, how things might be broken down. Phase 1, access. Parking, small plots, and then, maybe some parking spaces. That's an easy kind of low-hanging fruit. Focus on that kind of getting people to the park and getting it, get kind of that catalyzed growing going, and then going out from there. Then you maybe add, that shelter space, a play space, and then expand the growing as it goes. And then it keeps going from there, as you can see. And some of those elements, some of those are maybe more targeted elements, and Scott can talk about how, funding with, CIP, grants, targeted fundraising. That's little there, but.
And actually, too, the implementation or the phasing would really, the Park Commission would be responsible for making those types of decisions. And actually, we've got the current CIP within for in 2023, we've got a park ID sign and then also the parking lot. So we're looking to do that in 2023. In 2024, we're looking at doing phase 1 of the park, and then actually in 2025, we're looking to do phase 2. And the funding source would be through parkland dedication fees. When a developer or development comes within the community, there's 2 fees that they pay. They either give us parkland or fee in lieu of parkland, and then they also give us park improvement fees. So the development of this park would be solely from those fees. It wouldn't be tax dollars. But certainly, the operation of this facility would come from the operating budget. And so there's people that need to mow and those kinds of things. And actually, I'm really thinking that at some point, the park staff, we're going to need some help in managing the community gardens that we have currently within our park system. And then we add a system like this, we're going to want to have professionals who are kind of managing it, maintaining it, so that we have the best fruit that we possibly can. So that, that would be something that would need to be an operational budget, which would go into the general budget for operations. And again, it's the Park Commission will kind of work on the phasing, and certainly. I would envision the higher area at the beginning, at the top, as being a phase 1, along with maybe some paths and those kinds of things being under phase 1, and then kind of going with phase 2, which might be some more amenities or whatever, or maybe the water or whatever it might be at that point. But that would really be the work of the Park Commission that would kind of figure that out.
All right. I'm not checking my email. I'm responding to someone online here. They had a question. Someone said, I'd really like to see benches and seating area along the trails and public uses. We have a senior living center coming to Terravessa, and I think the seniors would appreciate the opportunity to sit. Extra bonus. 1 or 2 of those have shade features, whether a tree or a structure. So I think that's another good comment, is just kind of those added benefits. So maybe it's not serving a direct grower, but community member that wants to see it and wants to see.
And if you're familiar with the site, there's a path system within the whole Terravessa development. So this would just kind of be another potential destination for walkers to go to.
Okay. Okay, so next steps, we're going to take all these comments back. And for those willing and online, I fully encourage you to participate, to give those comments. I know we've heard some today already, which is great. But if you're not, now you can either leave them on a Post-it note, stick them on the boards, talk to me, email Scott. But it's an important part that we get that feedback, whether it's a general comment or something more targeted and specific. Whether you like one option versus the other, those things I talked about earlier, that really helps drive and really gives the city of Fitchburg ownership of what they want to see. And then we will develop that master plan, and then kind of a phasing strategy, and then begin implementation. So, yes, sir.
I'm just wondering if Terravessa, because it's kind of off to the side of a lot of Fitchburg and, two major roads between, is there going to be a small farmer's market in the concept there, or?
I think that certainly is a great
And I could see this playing into that as well. So it'd be the double, you get a double play out of that,
Yeah. I think there's a lot of opportunity for programming in this site, and that's another conversation kind of in itself. It's certainly tied to it, but farmers market, certainly community events, community pumpkin picking day.
Is there any actual, beside the school, any actual community space in the development there? I'm a little unfamiliar with the specifics, even though I live a half a mile away.
Well, there's Oregon School up to the north, right?
But does it have, like some schools have a community function?
We've had conversations with them.
Because it's a place.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Living in a neighborhood where the only real amenity is the park.
Right.
Place would be, I'm sorry. If we didn't have that, and the paths that are there really have tied the neighborhood together. So it's been amazing,
Well, and if I might just draw your attention to the map there, you can see Oregon School on the north, and then we have like a natural area to the left. So, and we've actually planted some trees and communicated with the school district with curriculum and organic farming and all of those kinds of things. So it really, like you say, it's a whole community, and they could take a field trip to the south, and yeah. Oh.
I live in Terravessa, and originally I think they had, I don't know if it's still in the plan, but there was going to be like a town square type space, like right in the middle of the neighborhood. So there would be an opportunity to, have some kind of farmer's market there.
So it's still there?
Well, I mean, it's not developed yet, but it's in the plan.
And it really becomes a full functioning city, right? Small community.
I just had one more thought. We're mentioned on each of the plans, the place for children. And it wasn't real clear to me, but I'm not very good at looking at two-dimensional things anyway, but that the play equipment should be within the sight lines of the people who'd be working in their garden plots. Because you want to be able to stand up from what you're doing as the parent or grandparent and be able to see your kid. So if it's in a corner or behind a building or what have you, it's less useful to the people coming there to work on their garden plots.
Yeah, and that's a fair point.
Yeah.
And I think they're, certainly for that phase one, kind of the stuff that's focused up on that top area and the access site, I think there's a lot of visibility. Even if you go off down to the west, it's pretty close adjacency. But, as the park grows and expands, there's limitations. If you want to have a play space, it's a big site. And so it's a consideration, but having perfect sight lines is not always going to be achievable in a park of this size.
Another question. Talking about the kids' space, has there been any discussion about having like a kids' garden, that's specifically for kids? And I know you guys do like children's gardening stuff, just a space where kids can go in and the plants are available for them to pick and smell and, experience.
Yeah, there was some comments in the last meeting, talking with some folks. Not a dedicated space, but some of the ideas like with the berry patches and grapevines and things like that, those aren't envisioned as lease space. It's kind of like the urban orchard function, is that maybe the community invests in planting those, and then it's kind of come and pick and take home what you can. But I like that thought.
And I can just, we talked with the Forest Edge Elementary, which is on the north side, and they have a small kids garden program. So they were thinking of the agricultural park as like a visit, like field trip, walk over for classes and such, but they weren't so much thinking about having a dedicated area that they were going to be managing down there. We got about the same reaction from the Mariposa, is it the Mariposa? The child care center that's south of there. Yeah, I mean, and I think that's sort of been alluded to a lot, is that if you add an element, then you need to maintain the element, whether that's park staff or whether that's school staff or whether it could be, but you.
And that's good to know, because what we currently do with all of our community gardens, we have community garden leaders who are really kind of the main people. So, we got a community garden leader for Terravessa Ag Park right there. There you go.
All right. Well, unless there's other comments or questions, I really do encourage you to come up and write a note or talk to me.
Send us, send me an email.
Send an email.
And again, what we'll do is there's a lot of park commission members here, so they'll gather their thoughts and we'll kind of caucus and come up with a general concept, and then the park commission will work through that and come up with a final plan. So appreciate you being here.
Yeah.
And your time. Grab a plate of food before you go.
Thank you to those online.
Sorry for the delay, though. You're very patient.